Thank you so much, Koromone. And good afternoon, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Solape Akinpelu, CEO, HerVest, and Inclusive FinTech for Women. And this afternoon, we'll be talking about Buy Now, Pay Later. Thank you for sticking around. I hope you've been enjoying the conversations as much as have been doing. Buy Now, Pay Later, Wed Now, Pay Later, and while there, I just saw another one, Eat Now, Pay Later for grocery shopping. Interesting, right? All right, let's see. Joining me on this theme, discussing is Buy Now, Pay Later, the future of retail. Some amazing powerhouses, Chijioke Dozie, who is co-founder and CEO Carbon, Tsakane Ngoepe, Director of Strategic Finance at M-KOPA. Can we get great applause for them, please? And then we have Eric Muli. Eric is the CEO of LipaLater. Amazing powerhouses, you'd agree with me. Hi, Tsakane, thank you for joining us. Can you hear clearly? Beautiful.
Yeah, I can hear you clearly.
Do we have all the panelists online now? All right, so let's just go right in and shoot. And my first question would be to all panelists. And yes, by the way, we can all participate by dropping a question. No, sliding into Slido, right? That's cooler speak. You know, slide into Slido and drop your questions while the conversation is going on. We'll take your questions, as many as we can. All right, so my first question would be to all the panelists, and we can start with Tsakane, as she's on the screen right now. And that is this lovely energy that we love, by the way, around Buy Now, Pay Later on the continent. What's fueling this energy? What's happening? Why Buy Now, Pay Later? Over to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there's really a lot of interesting energy and excitement, I think, around the Buy Now, Pay Later and in general consumer lending space across Africa. I think this energy has existed an interest has existed for a long time before even the phrase BNPL was coined. When M-KOPA was founded 10 years ago, the phrase BNPL didn't exist, and I'm sure that's what we couldn't call ourselves. But where does this all, why does this all exist? And fundamentally, it comes down to an issue of, across Africa, you're talking about a lot of households that are earning on a monthly basis relatively, low levels of income. If anyone has to spend or make a purchase that's more than $100, that's often more than half of their monthly income. So anytime that a household or an individual has to, make a major purchase, it's really two things that they have to access. Either they would have had to save for a really long time to be able to afford that purchase, such as a smartphone, or they have to get access to credit. And of course, in a lot of the markets that we operate in, a lot of Africans don't have access to credit from traditional institutions. So a lot of companies like ours, which enable underbanked customers who are typically not financed by the traditional institutions, have really been what's at the forefront of Buy Now, Pay Later, digital lending, alternative lending, whatever you may call it. And we've been playing in this space and have been able to unlock over $500 million of credit to 2 million customers. But as I said,
Hi, Tsakane, can you still?
Customers, given their incomes, credit is difficult to access from traditional institutions, and that's really what companies like ours solve.
Awesome, thank you so much. Chijioke, could you kindly address that question? What's this energy about, especially on the African continent, emerging markets, so to speak?
Thank you. I think, BMPL is exciting because of Fikayo of TechCabal just had this slide where he shows the credit card penetration. And I think the advantages of BMPL is, it's convenient when you compare it to credit cards. We don't have enough credit cards in our markets. Nigeria was not in his data sheet, but I suspect that it's also very low. BMPL is very simple. You go into a store, you see what you want, and you can buy it. And you can pay later, and it's also a win-win for the merchant. Typically the merchant also pays a rebate to the BMPL provider as a reward for bringing customers to them. So it's convenient, it's simple, and it's very sort of merchant friendly. I think that's why it's exciting. And as Tsakane said, I think Buy Now Pay Later has existed for decades before BNPL is sexy. I think a lot of us, even in the 80s, or I'm showing my age, but when there's so many supermarkets that would used to give people goods on credit. Your tailors sometimes give you goods on credit. That's BNPL. If a vendor or merchant is giving you something and you haven't paid for it all up front, that's essentially Buy Now Pay Later. What we're doing is just really sort of commercializing it, on sort of steroids.
Awesome. Convenience is always a winner. All right, Eric, over to you. What's fueling Buy Now Pay Later? Eric? All right, while waiting for Eric, so I'll just go back to Chijioke and ask, who are the typical Buy Now Pay Later users? Are they low-income earners, millennials, mass affluent? Are people now buying Bugattis on BNPL? So who typically, are the BNPL consumers?
I think everyone is a BNPL consumer, and I think that when you look at some of the BNPL companies, we employ different strategies because we're targeting a different segment. So and also it depends on the merchants you're working with. So for instance, if I'm a BNPL provider and my merchants are, let's say, iStore or some Samsung, so that means that I'm targeting maybe millennials, sort of middle class, upper middle class, because you're buying MacBook Pros. These are like $2,000. These are $2,000 price tags. I could, some BNPL providers work with merchants that sell sort of phones on the low end, and they also have longer tenors, and they're targeting sort of low income. So I think, with credit, one of the things that we've learned over 10 years in the market is that everyone wants credit. Everyone is your consumer. It's up to you as the provider to say, okay, which space do I want to play in? Do I want millennials? Do I want high end customers? Do I want more affluent customers? And then you tailor your processes to match the customers you want. But seriously, everyone is a consumer, and I think that's also why investors like BNPL. It's everyone wants to consume. Everyone needs and wants goods or services, and there's several different BNPL players, even on this panel, that cater to different stratas of society.
Awesome, thank you so much, Tsakane. In your experienced opinion, what were the initial challenges faced when you started Buy Now Pay Later services in the African market?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'll, in a way, I'll refer back to what Chijioke said, which is, everyone is a consumer of credit to some extent, and it's really about where you choose to play as a provider in this market. M-KOPA's history going 10 years back started as a provider of solar home systems and appliances to primarily rural and peri-urban customers. And some of the challenges then, some of which still exist now, really came down to two things. The first was distribution. You were talking about customers that didn't necessarily live very close to the nearest mall or the nearest retail shop. So as a business, we had to figure out a way to get products to those customers at the last mile. And how we have chosen to do that is by building our own direct sales agent network, very similar to how a lot of mobile money companies have done across different markets. So one, in the beginning as a company, we tried to partner with other companies to distribute our products to customers, but we found that there was a limit in terms of the reach of those companies, particularly in peri-urban and rural areas. And so we used our own sales agent network to really make sure we meet customers where they are. The second challenge really came with credit, particularly access to data. Today, there are a lot more data sources that are available on customers that you can use potentially to do credit scoring. There was not so much 10 years ago. And that led to us choosing to use the model that was described in the presentation earlier, which is leveraging the asset that we're financing for the customer as quasi-collateral by being able to remotely control it and kind of leveraging the data from there as our business. But I think those have really been the two big challenges when we grew as a BMPL company or pay-as-you-go company, and those are the two ways that we have tackled it so far.
All right, thank you so much. A fallout, speaking about data, what are your policies, or how exactly have you, what's your experience so far in terms of data protection and identity verification of people to avoid digital fraud? Yeah,
that's a great question. And this is an area where there has actually been a lot of progress over the last decade. This was something that was very, very, very difficult to do 5-10 years ago. Today, there are lots of KYC providers that exist in the market to enable companies like us to securely and remotely kind of verify the identity of our customers. So this is not something that we try to tackle ourselves. We often partner with other KYC verification companies like Onfido, Smile Identity, companies like that, to make sure that the customers that we're serving are who they say they are. There's always the issue of fraud and data protection. As a company, we actually, most people ask us, oh, you're financing a customer's phone. You must know everything that they're doing on their phone and use that to inform your credit models. And for us in the end, that's not true because we haven't found that data to be predictive. So I think one of the most important things when it comes to data protection, particularly as a company, is not overreaching in terms of the data that you're trying to access from customers. And secondly, for any data that you are accessing from those customers, making sure that they're informed and that they consent to the data that you are collecting from them. So one, when it comes to KYC, partner where you can. That's worked very well for us. When it comes to data privacy and protection, don't overreach and make sure that you have, consent for the data that you're getting from customers.
Certainly, don't overreach. Thank you, Tsakane. Do we have Eric online now? Hi, Eric. Okay. All right, Chijioke. Still speaking about growth and challenges. What were the earliest challenges, and in your opinion, what are the growth determinants for the buy now, pay later economy?
I think one of the challenges has been, people don't believe that they don't believe you can get a product at 0%. They don't believe that, you could buy a product and spread it over 6 weeks or 3 months at the same price that you would have paid if you bought it in cash. And, when we have spoken to other BMPL providers in other emerging markets, we found that was actually one of the biggest barriers, was people just didn't believe it was true. So it must be a gimmick. And, it's like when we started, digital lending in 2016 with Pay Later, people didn't believe that somebody in Kano would get a 20,000 naira loan from somebody they've never met, just by downloading the app and putting some data points. So I think belief is one. I think secondly is, I think particularly for Nigeria, when you look at BMPL providers like the big ones, Klarna, Affirm, Afterpay, in their economies, e-commerce is huge. So, and a lots of, and you can aggregate lots of merchants online. I think in Nigeria, for us, what we found is, when we started, we said, okay, let's just copy and paste what they've done, and let's do e-commerce. But most of the commerce is still offline. And, some of our successful merchants are not merchants that are, okay, you have your Congas, you have your Jumias, but you also have merchants who, maybe she goes abroad to Dubai or the UK, buys 600 iPhones and comes back and, sets up an Instagram shop. That's a merchant as well. So we've had to think about how can we serve the Congas, the Jumias, the Spars, the Electromarts, but also serve the Instagram or the WhatsApp merchant as well. So that's why we've taken a multi-channel approach where you can use Carbon Zero, our BMPL product, online or in store. But we've also put it on our debit card. So that means that you can be empowered to do a buy now, pay later transaction with any merchant that you see fit. Even though Carbon hasn't got an official relationship with that merchant, because we recognize that in our markets, a lot of the merchants are, individuals or small SMEs that are not above the radar. So I think that's something that we've grappled with, and we've had to sort of localize that to our own environment and not just copy and paste. Because there are BMPL merchants in the UK, for instance, that can sign up to a local aggregator and get 50,000 merchant relationships in one single transaction. We have to go, store by store. But then there are not many big box merchants in Nigeria. There probably maybe 100 nationally known. So you have to go. You have to have a strategy to get the merchants that are also on the Paystack stores or the Flutwave stores or the bumpers, catalogs, etc. So it's a lot of work.
I know it's a lot of work. And speaking about that work, how do you ensure that a user, a beneficiary, is creditworthy? And then secondly, what are the processes put in place to determine this?
So, Carbon has been lending, as I said, for over 10 years. So, and I think we see Buy Now Pay Later as not a standalone product, but as a feature of our digital bank. So we adopt the same processes as we do for lending, which is, at least from a Nigerian perspective, when somebody comes in and wants to borrow money or do a BMPL transaction, we do 2 credit bureau checks to ensure that they haven't defaulted on any previous prior loans, and also to see if there's any outstanding debt they have that might affect their affordability. We look at their bank statements. If they're a Carbon customer, we look at their records with Carbon and their transaction history, not only to gauge affordability, but to also gauge whether there's any outstanding, whether there's any sort of bad payment records. So that's what we can do all of this instantly before we actually approve or reject the customer.
Absolutely. Great methods, I would say. If Eric is on the line, thank you so much for that, Chijioke. If Eric is here now, I have a question for him, and it's about merchants. So Chijioke had mentioned merchants, partnerships. So in terms of partnership with merchants, are there issues or concerns that these merchants will be able to pay back on time? Because that looks like a concern in the buy now, pay later economy. Eric?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, in our case, we do work in some cases with merchants, and in those cases, we are actually the ones paying the merchant. So that's not, really a challenge, right? The customer is going to the merchant, selecting a product that they want from the merchant, and we are paying the merchant on behalf of the customer. So who we have to be concerned about as a party in this case is, whether the customer will be paying us back. There are obviously, some arrangements in which we are collecting revenue from the merchant because we've brought a customer to them, but that essentially gets taken off the transaction from the customer upfront. And so there's not an issue of a delayed payment with the agent, so with the merchant itself. So in our case, that's something that's kind of taken off at the point of transaction, so it's not an issue that we have to deal with in our business model.
Thank you so much. Do we have questions from audience on Slido? All right, we've got one here. Looking at the time value of money, what's the sweet spot for benchmarking interest rates for credit services? Interesting. Chijioke, you want to take that?
Sure. I think the answer is it depends. I think a good lender would adopt a risk-based pricing model that has several factors in. What's inflation? What's that lender's own cost of funds? And then also what's the risk, the actual customer that's looking for a loan, what's her risk profile? And so when you take in all those factors, then you can apply a rate. So that means that what you might apply to, even with the same lender, what I might pay in interest could be completely different to what Tsakane pays in interest, because let's say she has a better payment history than me. Maybe she has more. The lender thinks her affordability is a lot stronger than myself. So I think that's so there is no sort of. I mean, I know lots of lenders have flat rates, but in time, especially as the loan book matures, a good lender will start adopting risk-based pricing based on all these factors, and also the target return, what they also as a company want to get as a return for their investment.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And that brings this session to a close. I'd like to appreciate Chijioke Dozie, Tsakane Ngoepe, and Eric Muli for joining us. My name is Solape Akinpelu. Thank you for standing by.